Welcome to today's session, an introduction to RSRO. As part of the 2020 regional rules session this year, welcome to the world of compliance. We'll be conducting multiple sessions to assist new compliance professionals as they navigate this field. Today's session will be a prerequisite for the future session titled How to Write an Interpretation and Waiver. My name is Sarah Hebard. I am an Assistant Director in Academic and Membership Affairs, and I am joined today by Angela Tressel, an Associate Director in AMA, and today's guest presenter, Marie Dillon, an Assistant Director in AMA. Marie will be telling us about herself and providing a demonstration on the basic functions of RSRO and how to navigate this system.
So welcome, Marie.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks for joining us today. We'd really like to dive a little bit first into who you are and how you came to work at the NCAA.
Well, I came to the NCAA about 12 years ago. I actually started at the Eligibility Center answering public legislative calls. So I took those calls from the public, answering any questions they might have, most of which were about transfers. And then about 7-8 years ago, I moved over to AMA. And my background actually is in IT, so this is kind of definitely a different change for me.
Great. And so if you can explain, what's your current role in academic and membership affairs?
Currently, I'm an assistant director, and I work in the bylaw 11, 13, and 17 team, where I do interpretations and legislative relief waivers for them, as well as a member of the AMA technology team, which works with like all the AMA apps, so like LSTBI, compliance forms, single source sign-on, and compliance assistant, all those technologies.
Awesome. So Marie, you mentioned you're on the technology team. Can you tell us what are some of the most common requests you get from the membership regarding technology?
Well, some of the most common questions I get are they can't e-sign, so electric sign, and submit their waivers. Most of the time that has to do with them not having access to RSRO or not having a correct permissions within single source sign-on. For help with that, they would need to contact their single source administrator on campus. Another one I have is whenever an institution tries to put a bylaw on a case, the actual bylaw, it pops up LSTBI and their pop-ups are blocked. So those are some of the common ones we get.
Perfect. I think that is a great segue into our demonstration today. So Marie, you're going to be showing us how to submit an interpretation and waiver through RSRO from the perspective of the membership. So with that being said, I will turn it over to you for today's demonstration.
Well, thanks, Sarah. I'm going to go ahead and share my RSRO screen, and we're going to start at the beginning. From here, from when you first log in, go to www.nca.org, and to get to our applications, you click on the My Apps button. From here, you're going to sign in, and you use your email address and a password that's been set up by your single source sign-on administrator to be able to get into the application. If you don't know if your email address is different from if your email address has changed, make sure that you talk through that with your single source sign-on administrator, because if the email address has changed, you won't be able to get in. But I'm going to go ahead and log in my test account. And from here, you're going to see all the applications that you have access to, or that I have access to. If you do not see RSRO on that screen, make sure you contact your single source sign-on administrator, because you probably don't have access to the application. From here, I'm going to click on RSRO. I am Sally Sample, and I'm going to agree to my disclaimer. Now, from here, it's going to automatically default you to the home screen, which will actually show you any cases that you've submitted, any cases you're waiting on. But what we're going to focus on today is actually submitting an interp and a waiver. And to do that, you go over to the Request or Self-Report tab. From here, you're going to see this is actually a wizard that'll help you decide what type of waiver you're going to submit. But we're going to focus over here, which allows you to select the case type that you're going to work on. So I clicked on the arrow here on the right-hand side, and I'm going to select interpretation request to start. From there, I'll click on continue. This opens up the actual application for you to be able to submit your interpretation. If you look on the screen, you're going to see your institution. I'm D1 test. Anyway, and then one thing I wanted to point out was the academic year related to. If it's, say, the summer and if this waiver is for something into the 2021 academic year, you do want to make sure you change that, because RSRO will automatically check your sports sponsorship information. If anything has changed, it'll look at your conference affiliations, it'll look at bylaws, what comes into effect in August, that type of thing. So if you do that to the correct year, that is always helpful. From here in an interpretation, the next thing you select is what we call them subcases, but basically what bylaw this actual interpretation is tied to. So if you wanted to do a recruiting question, you click on bylaw 13. If you want to do anything to do with amateurism, you click on bylaw 12. So that'll sort down what type of case it is. The next step is actually selecting the legislation that is actually tied to the interpretation. This is required. And when you click on that button, it's actually going to pop up an LSDBI window. From there, you'll see the bylaw. You'll type in 13521 and the bylaws will show up. There'll be a green paperclip. You click on the green paperclip and it'll attach the legislation to the actual case. The next step is, and I've had a bunch of questions on this, why do I have to put in a one-sentence statement? This is actually kind of a brief description of what the interpretation is. The reason we use this is a lot of our team leads, when they're looking at the case, it gives them a quick snapshot as to what the interpretation request is about. The quick snapshot then allows them to be able to assign the case out to a team member to be able to process it easier. So make sure you're clear and concise and give a pretty good description of what the question is about. The next piece is asking whether or not the interpretation is considered urgent. When we decide on urgent, it's based on you need an answer within the next 2 days. Bear in mind, our staff will look at that and decide whether or not it's something that meets our guidelines for urgent. If you do say yes, it'll ask you why. Now I'm going to go ahead and save and continue to the next page. From here, it's just some additional information. This is where you get the opportunity to actually give the in-depth question you have. So this gives you more space to write all about what type of interpretation or what your question is. It's also going to ask if you've contacted anybody from the NCAA and talked about it. This helps us, again, guide to how we want to assign the case. The next part is, have you talked to the conference office? And if you did talk to the conference office, RSRO is going to ask you for your analysis as well as what the conference's analysis was. The next section is the documentation. And from here, you can upload things like, if this is regarding some kind of camp, you can upload the camp brochure. If there's a document or something that was put on Twitter, you can upload all that information into the document section. Remember, when you're putting in an interpretation, the more information you give us, the easier it is for us to process the waiver and give you a better, or an interpretation, sorry, and give you a better response. So just remember that when you're putting the information in. The last step is actually putting in your primary and secondary contacts into RSRO. From here, you actually will have a drop down of who is in your database for contact. So you can click on that person and if the phone number is there, it'll automatically put it in. If the phone number is not there and you want to change it, make sure that you stick with the format that's on the screen, because RSRO is very picky about that phone number. And if it's not in the right format, it'll kick it out. And that brings up another question. When you go to hit submit on either a waiver or an interp, when there's errors in the submission, the actual the tab will turn red and the error will turn red. So you'll know what you're missing. When you're completed with everything you want in that interpretation, again, you would click on the disclaimer, the terms and conditions, and then you click submit. And at that point, then when it's submitted, it actually is sent to our staff to be able to be assessed by our team leads. And when I say assessed and assigned, what that means is our team leads will review each one of the cases and say, oh, this is the difficulty level. This goes to this person, that person. They try to look at what it is, and if they have any general knowledge on the interpretation, they'll give you that information as well to the actual team member that's going to process your interp. So after you click submit, that's where it all goes. Now I'm going to go ahead, if that's okay with you, Sarah, I'm going to go ahead and move on to submitting a legislative relief waiver. So to submit, after I've submitted the interp, now if I want to submit a legislative relief waiver, I go back to request or self-report, to the drop down over here under select the type of case. And I'm just going to bring this up really quick. If you look on the screen, you're going to see what type of cases you can submit. So from here, if you are going to submit a season of competition waiver, you can do that as well. We're focusing on interpretations and legislative relief waivers, but I wanted to bring that up as well. Now I'm going to do a legislative relief waiver. Legislative relief waivers have quite a few more questions and documentation requirements. And I'm going to click on continue, and now I'm going to start this legislative relief waiver. The same things apply. You're going to get your institution, your division, your conference. The same thing regarding the academic year. If you are doing something for the 2021 academic year, make sure you click on the drop down and choose 2021. Wherever the heck it is, there it is. Then they're going to ask you questions about whether or not you had a phone waiver. If you did receive a phone waiver from us, make sure you do say yes to this, because we are looking for that to come in so we can actually process it. Say yes, and it's going to actually ask you who provided the phone waiver to you. It'll ask you questions about whether it's coming from a committee. Have you talked to anybody at AMA or a conference office? If you say yes, it's going to ask additional questions. The next part I want to talk about is subcase types inside of a legislative relief waiver. The beginning of it all, and each one of these subcase types will have different subcase types. But the beginning of this helps sort out who gets the case and what the case is all about. So the first level is whether it's for a student athlete or a prospective student athlete. If it's a request for a sports team, so something like my team wants to go on a foreign tour. And the last one is some kind of event. So something regarding a sports camp, that would go in that category. The student athlete or a prospective student athlete could be something where a prospective student athlete is coming on campus and you want to be able to provide him some kind of benefits. So you would start down that avenue. I'm going to go ahead and click on the prospective student athlete button. And underneath there are additional cases, subcase types that are tied to a student athlete or prospective student athlete. You can see from here, there's the recruiting, there's transfer, financial aid, delayed enrollment, and delayed enrollment for competition prior to collegiate enrollment. You can choose one of these. Once you choose one of these, there are different questions that are asked, as well as different documentation requirements. I'm going to go ahead and choose the recruiting, playing and practice seasons. I'm going to keep going on down the screen. Again, it's going to ask you to describe the request for relief. In this, please be clear on what you want relief for. You know, do you want relief to be able to allow them to donate to a GoFundMe account? Do you want them to do that and be able to allow other staff to share that GoFundMe account address? So again, my point is be clear as to what you want the relief of. The next question is regarding the legislation. Again, just like an interpretation, you have to put what bylaw this is tied to. Try to be as specific as you can. like, for example, put in 13521, not just bylaw 13. So the more specific you are, then we can know what you're asking for, and it helps in processing the waiver, helps speed the process as well. The next question is regarding case precedent. So if you know of a case that is similar to your request, please put those cases in there. You can use the search option to search for case precedent as well. And that'll help you find if there is anything where we've been at before. If you have case precedent that you feel is on point, that does help in processing the waiver as well. Because I selected the subcase type for a student athlete, a prospective student athlete, I am going to have to provide an NCID. The NCID is required so that they know, basically so that we know who it is and what the status is of the student athlete, but it is actually required in these case types. You also need to add the sport, and they ask for when the next date of competition is. That helps to allow to decide the speed of processing as well. So if it's the next date of competition is sport isn't until the springtime, and this is August, it will not be considered as urgent. Again, you get the option to decide whether or not you require expedited review. If you say yes, they're going to ask you why. So, I mean, if the next date of competition is the next day, it is definitely an expedited review urgent case. It's going to ask you when the student athlete enrolled at the institution. I'm going to go ahead and save and continue to the next page. I'm trying to briefly go through all of these. This gives you the option to actually further describe what it is you're submitting. So it gives you, again, as much information as you can provide. It helps with the processing of the waiver. And remember, when you're processing a waiver, you are looking at extenuating circumstances. So if there are certain things like financial need, make sure you cert that and there's documentation tied to it. That helps, again, with the processing. We won't have to come back and ask you questions. But again, a waiver is decided based on those extenuating circumstances. So make sure that you're describing those, and that is actually the next box. It's going to ask you if you've contacted anybody previously from the NCAA, and it's going to ask you information about the student athlete, when they enrolled, how long they were at the institution, did they receive aid, did they practice, did they compete, were they full-time, were they part-time. You'll see all that information in here. To actually add that information on this screen, you click on the add button and it'll ask you the questions and you have to fill them out. If you've got any kind of statement from the student athlete, they're going to ask you to upload that here as well. And was the student athlete recruited? Again, each question is different based on the subcase type you chose. So since this subcase type was regarding a student athlete or a prospective student athlete, they're going to ask a lot of questions about the student athlete. The next button is actually documentation. On the subcase type I chose, it just has recommended documentation. Some of the subcase types will actually have required documentation. If you do not upload required documentation, the case will not be able to be submitted. So remember that whenever you're looking at the actual cases. So if it's required, the case won't be submitted until you actually have the documentation. In the subcase type I chose here, it's just asking for written statements or any other documentation tied to the request. These are recommended. And again, I know I've said this a couple times, but if you do have anything, the more you can provide us, the more helpful it'll be in the processing of the waiver. The last part, well, I guess I got two more. The next section is signatures. When you submit a legislative relief waiver, you need an inside athletics signature and an outside athletics signature. The inside athletics signature is basically just that, anyone inside of athletics. So you could be signing it or you could have your AD signing it, depending on your institutional processes. Then the other one is the outside athletics department. Typically, that is the FAR that signs that. I've seen different types of signatures, but normally that's the FAR. You can do an electronic signature, or you can actually upload the signature. If you want to upload the signature, down below, you'll see where the actual documents are stored. You can save those in a PDF and have them electronically sign it in the PDF, or you can have them manually sign it and then upload the document. To upload it, basically you choose the little drop down right here and it'll have upload or e-sign. Also inside the signatory, you'll see who actually has signed them in the past or has signatory access to RSRO. So normally you can just pick the person and then say e-sign and you're good to go. The last thing on this page is the Buckley. Oh, one more thing about e-signs. If you don't see your name in the drop down or the names do not look correct, you need to contact your single source administrator. If your single source administrator happens to be you and you have questions, feel free to reach out to the RSRO inbox, which if you look at the top of the screen, you'll see the contact us. That will actually send an email to the RSRO inbox, and I ultimately get the questions. So you can send it to rsro@ncaa.org. You can click on contact us, or you can send me an email directly. It's mdillon@ncaa.org. Last part on here is the Buckley statement, and each Buckley is connected to the case. So when you do the Buckley for this case, it's actually going to be specific to the student athlete as well as the case number. This Buckley is different than what the student athletes signed at the beginning of the year when they did compliance forms. This is unique to the case and specific to the case. So if you do have a case you're submitting for a student athlete or a prospective student athlete, you do need to do the Buckley. The hard copy of the Buckley is down here. It comes, if you open it, it'll be in a PDF form. You can have them sign it. You can have them electronic sign it through the PDF. And then from there, you can actually upload it into the system. And it will be required in most legislative, if it's regarding student athlete, it's going to be required inside of a legislative relief waiver. From here, we're going to save and continue. And the last part is the primary and secondary contact. Again, as I said on Interp, when you click on the button, you'll see who the contact people are. And the phone numbers themselves are picky, so make sure you're in the correct format. From there, you're going to agree, and then you're going to click on the submit button. When you click on submit, like I said with an interpretation, that waiver actually gets submitted to the NCAA staff. One thing about a waiver, and this goes for all waivers in RSRO, until you get the actual signatures or the staff member e-signs the signature, the case will not be completely submitted. It'll be kind of in a submitted waiting signatures state. But so just remember that the waiver is not submitted until you actually get the signatures. You'll get a notification when your requested signatory signs the actual waiver. You'll get an email from AMA or from RSRO that'll tell you that, yes, indeed, they have signed. Once the case gets submitted, it'll go to our team leads at AMA, and they will evaluate the case and assign it out to the staff, just like an interp, and they'll assess the level of difficulty and assign it to the appropriate staff member for them to process it. If it is considered urgent, it'll be marked as bright red on our screen, and they will evaluate it accordingly. Once it's submitted, then we start the process. You will get an email also whenever it gets assigned to one of our staff members, and it'll tell you who that person is. I think that's it. Does anyone have questions? Hi, Sarah. Hi, Angela.
So, Marie, thank you so much for going through that information. One of the issues that I think all new compliance administrators have is just understanding the systems that they have to use. So we really appreciate you walking through that. You've provided your contact information. You are the person a lot of times that our membership is talking to. So now they have a face and a name to go along with that. But, we just really appreciate it. And I think that concludes our session today. I do want to highlight that NCA staff, including Sarah, myself, and others will talk about how to write an interp and how to successfully write a legislative relief waiver, just to help newer compliance administrators understand some of the tips and tricks and best practices before you submit, as Marie just highlighted. So thank you again for attending, and we will talk with you soon.